Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply healing faster than anyone expected you to. Not to prove a point, not to make him jealous, but because you finally choose yourself over the pain he caused. And nothing bruises a man's ego more than realizing the heartbreak he thought would break you barely slowed you down. When a man leaves your life, a part of him expects you to crumble, not always out of cruelty, but out of ego. He assumes he was the center of your emotional universe, the source of your joy, the anchor of your identity. He believes his absence will create a void so deep that you'll struggle to fill it. That's why your fast healing becomes such a profound shock to his system. It shatters the illusion that he was irreplaceable and forces him to confront a reality he never prepared for. You were never dependent on him the way he imagined. Healing fast doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you finally realized your peace was worth more than your pain. It means you refused to let heartbreak dictate your pace or define your future. It means you chose to rise instead of sit in the wreckage of something that didn't value you. And that choice, that strength, is what deeply unsettles him. Because suddenly, the narrative he created in his mind, the one where you'd miss him endlessly, long for him, wait for him, becomes impossible to hold on to. Your recovery interrupts the fantasy he had of his own importance. When a woman heals quickly, it sends a message without her ever having to speak. You were not my entire world. That realization stings. It forces him to rethink everything he believed about himself and about the relationship. He thought you needed him to feel complete, but your resilience proves that you needed yourself far more. It shows that your happiness didn't begin with him, and it certainly won't end with him, and that contradicts the ego-driven belief that he played a bigger role in your life than he truly did. The beauty of your fast healing is that it doesn't rely on anger or revenge. It comes from peace, clarity, and self-respect. You don't chase closure because you understand that closure is something you create within yourself. You don't demand apologies because you're no longer burdened by the need for his validation. You don't wait for him to return because you've already returned to yourself. This kind of healing is powerful. It shifts the emotional gravity back into your hands, and what he feels is not just surprise, but displacement. He thought he had a permanent place in your emotions, only to realize he was temporary in your story. What shakes him most is how natural your healing looks. You start glowing again. You laugh without trying. Your routines rebuild. Your energy resets. Your presence changes. Everything about you begins moving forward, while everything about him remains stuck in the idea of who he thought you'd be without him. That contrast, your growth against his assumptions, creates a quiet discomfort in him. It forces him to acknowledge that maybe he wasn't the gift he imagined himself to be. Maybe he wasn't as essential as he believed. Maybe you were always the stronger one, and deep down he knows the truth. A woman who heals fast didn't lose herself in the relationship. She simply learned from it, grew past it, and outpaced the pain it caused. He realizes too late that the emotional dependency he counted on never existed. He was a chapter you read, understood, and closed. Meanwhile, he's still holding the book open, waiting for pages that aren't coming. Your healing becomes his mirror. It reflects his misconceptions, his limitations, his inflated sense of importance. And the sting he feels isn't heartbreak, it's the collapse of his ego, because nothing humbles a man more than watching a woman he thought would break become even stronger without him. You didn't just survive, you rose, and he didn't see it coming. Peace is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength we have. Most people think peace is passive, that it means stepping back, giving up, or staying quiet. But real peace is not the absence of noise. It's the refusal to let noise control you. And that's why ego hates it. Ego wants chaos. Ego wants reactions. Ego wants you unsettled, emotional, and off balance. Because the moment you become peaceful, ego loses its power over you. Your peace is the moment you stop playing a game someone else designed. Peace begins when you decide that you are no longer responsible for fixing someone else's insecurity, mood swings, or emotional immaturity. You stop chasing explanations from someone who communicates only in mixed signals. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who only values you when they feel like it. Instead, you shift your focus from decoding them to honoring yourself. And once you place your energy back where it belongs, on you, the entire dynamic changes. Not because you're trying to teach them a lesson, but because you're finally choosing yourself. Most people react when they feel ignored, dismissed, or undervalued. They argue, they defend, they chase. They try to win back the approval of someone who was inconsistent from the beginning. But when you choose peace, you stop reacting to emotional bait. You stop feeding the drama. You refuse to participate in the back and forth that once drained you. And that silence becomes loud, that calm becomes noticeable. Ego isn't used to that. Ego depends on control, and control fades the moment you stop engaging. When someone mistreats you, distances themselves, or plays hot and cold games, what they're often seeking is reassurance that no matter what they do, you'll still be there. They want to know they can come and go as they please, and you'll absorb the impact. But peace breaks that pattern. Peace says, I'm not angry, I'm not chasing, I'm not fighting, I'm simply unavailable for anything that disturbs my stability. That is the most disarming thing you can do. It's important to understand that peace doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means you're no longer willing to suffer to keep someone else comfortable. It means you're choosing emotional clarity over emotional chaos. And when you do that, the person who relied on your reactions feels it immediately. They notice the shift. Suddenly, they're not getting the emotional highs they used to get from your confusion or your hurt. Suddenly, they're faced with their own behavior without your emotional cushion. Your peace forces people to confront themselves. It exposes what they thought they were hiding. Your quiet becomes a mirror, and ego hates mirrors because mirrors show the truth. A person who was once sure they had endless access to you starts questioning everything. They wonder if they pushed too far. They wonder if they underestimated you. They wonder if losing you is now a real possibility. And that is where regret grows. Regret not driven by your anger, but by your absence. Peace is not for the other person. It's for you. It's the state you reach when you stop giving away your emotional currency to someone who didn't invest back. It's a reclaiming of your energy, your dignity, your sense of self. It's the moment you realize you don't need someone else's validation to feel valued. And when you get to that point, you stop trying to control outcomes and instead trust that losing anyone who cannot match your peace is not a loss at all. That's the quiet strength ego can't stand, and the power that changes everything. When a man is genuinely hooked, it rarely looks like the dramatic gestures people imagine. It's not always flowers, long paragraphs, or grand confessions. Most of the time, it shows up in subtle, consistent behaviors that reveal he's emotionally invested. The problem is that many people miss these signs because they're too busy looking for intensity instead of sincerity. Being hooked isn't about obsession, it's about commitment. It's not about him chasing you wildly, it's about him choosing you steadily. And those choices are what reveal his true intentions. A man who is hooked becomes predictable in the best way. Not predictable as in boring, but predictable as in reliable. He shows up. He doesn't leave you guessing. He doesn't disappear when things get complicated. When a man is genuinely interested, he wants to remove confusion, not create it. You won't have to decode him because he makes his intentions clear through his actions long before he ever spells them out in words. He texts back, he remembers what you told him, He follows through on plans. He communicates when something changes. He's not perfect, but he's present, and presence is the biggest sign of investment. Another sign is that he begins to think in terms of we instead of me. He starts including you in his decisions, his future plans, his daily life, not because he feels obligated, but because you've become a part of his thought process. When he's hooked, he wants to know your opinions. He wants your presence in the moments that matter to him. He makes space for you, not temporarily or when it's convenient, but naturally. This is the shift that tells you he's moved from casual interest to genuine emotional connection. A man who is hooked also shows vulnerability, not the dramatic kind, but the real kind, the kind that reveals he trusts you enough to let his guard down. He talks about his fears, his goals, his mistakes. He lets you see the parts of him he doesn't show the world easily. Men only open up emotionally when they feel safe, and emotional safety comes when they care deeply enough not to want to lose the person standing in front of them. Vulnerability is one of the strongest indicators of emotional investment because it requires courage, and people don't show courage for someone they don't value. Another behavior you'll notice is effort consistent, intentional effort. Effort is the language of someone who cares. It's him making time, not excuses. It's him prioritizing connection over comfort. It's him choosing the harder conversations instead of the easier silence. A man who is hooked doesn't just want you around. He wants to contribute to the relationship. He wants to grow with you, support you, and show you that you matter to him. Real effort cannot be faked, and it cannot be forced. It appears naturally when someone is emotionally invested. There's also a shift in how he treats your boundaries. When a man is hooked, he respects the limits you set, not because he has to, but because he genuinely wants to understand you. He listens, he adapts, he works with you instead of pushing against you. He values your comfort because he values you. The way a man responds to boundaries tells you more about his intentions than any sweet words ever will. A man who respects your boundaries is a man who sees your worth. The biggest sign of all, though, is peace. When a man is truly hooked, he brings more peace than confusion, more effort than excuses, more presence than promises. You feel valued, not drained, connected, not conflicted, and that feeling is the clearest evidence that he's genuinely invested in building something real with you. When someone hurts you, especially someone you gave your heart, your loyalty, and your best intentions to, it's easy to slip into the mindset of trying to win. You want them to feel your absence. You want them to realize what they lost. You want them to wake up one day and be haunted by regret. And while that desire is deeply human, the real power comes from choosing something far more impactful than revenge. Emotional distance. Not coldness, not bitterness, just choosing to no longer revolve around someone who didn't know how to handle the depth of you. When you decide to emotionally detach, it creates a ripple effect that hits harder than anything you could ever say or do. Emotional detachment isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about no longer offering your emotional energy to someone who didn't know how to protect it. It's the moment you stop explaining yourself to someone who was never listening. It's the moment you stop replaying conversations, trying to understand what went wrong. It's the moment you stop checking whether they viewed your story or noticed your silence. Emotional detachment is an act of reclaiming your inner world, and nothing unsettles the ego more than losing access to a world it once took for granted. Because the truth is, most people expect you to stay emotionally available to them, even after they've stopped choosing you. They expect your heart to stay open, your attention to stay fixed, your care to stay loyal. They assume that, no matter how far they go, you'll still be there in the background thinking of them, waiting for them, missing them. So when you break that pattern, when you choose to redirect your energy inward instead of toward them, it creates a shockwave. They feel the absence of your emotional presence long before they feel the absence of your physical presence. Emotional detachment is powerful because it removes the one thing people often use to control you, your reaction. As long as they can trigger you, they feel they still matter in your world. But when your response is simply calm neutrality, not anger, not tears, not begging, they're forced to confront something they never expected. You're not emotionally dependent on them anymore. That realization bruises their ego more deeply than any argument ever could. The ego survives on significance, and when you take that significance away, the ego starves. When you emotionally detach, you also start seeing them differently. The rose-colored lens disappears. The excuses fade, the illusions collapse. You stop viewing them as the person you wanted them to be and start seeing them as the person they actually are. That clarity alone weakens whatever emotional hold they once had. Clarity is the end of confusion, and confusion is what kept you stuck. Once you're clear, you're free, and when you're free, they lose the power they once had without ever lifting a finger. What's even more transformative is how emotional detachment shifts your focus back to yourself. You start nurturing your peace, your growth, your goals, your emotional environment. You begin to reconnect with the parts of yourself you silenced for the sake of the relationship. You give yourself back the emotional energy you kept pouring into someone who wasn't pouring anything back. And as you rise, as you rebuild, as you glow again from a place of inner wholeness, something incredible happens. They feel it. Even from a distance, even without a word, because the absence of your emotional attention becomes louder than your presence ever did. This is why emotional detachment is not an ending, it's a beginning. It's the beginning of reclaiming your power, your peace, and your sense of self. And nothing hurts someone's ego more than realizing that the person they once thought would always care no longer does. This is about the moment you stop explaining your worth and start embodying it. The moment you stop trying to convince someone to treat you better and instead raise your standards so high that they feel the shift without you saying a single word. When you elevate your boundaries, your life, your energy, you create a level they can't casually access anymore. And nothing disrupts a person's ego more than realizing your life no longer revolves around them, but around the person you're becoming. Raising your standards isn't about becoming cold or difficult. It's about becoming aligned with the version of you who refuses to settle for crumbs. It's about acknowledging that the bar you once kept low wasn't a reflection of your value. It was a reflection of how much you hoped they would rise. But hope is not a strategy, and emotional potential is not enough to sustain a relationship. When you raise your standards, you stop entertaining people who only offer potential and start choosing people who offer consistency. That shift alone is enough to make someone who took you for granted suddenly panic. People feel when the access they once had is no longer available. They feel when your energy becomes selective. They feel when your heart becomes protected. They feel when your attention is no longer automatic. And they feel when the version of you who tolerated the bare minimum no longer exists. Suddenly, they're not just losing you, they're losing the parts of you that made their life easier. Your patience, your generosity, your loyalty, your softness. Once those parts are no longer freely available, the loss becomes real in a way their ego can't ignore. What makes this so powerful is that raising your standards isn't something you declare, it's something you live. You stop answering messages that disrespect your time. You stop engaging in conversations that go nowhere. You stop giving second, third, and 10th chances to someone who hasn't earned any. You stop bending to fit into someone else's comfort zone. And you start showing up differently for yourself. You start valuing your emotional health over temporary connection. You start choosing relationships where effort is mutual, intention is clear, and respect is foundational. And the moment you do this, you create a version of yourself they no longer recognize, a version who is no longer available to be mistreated, minimized, or manipulated. The ego isn't built for this kind of change. It expects you to stay predictable. It expects you to stay small. It expects you to keep tolerating behavior that hurts you. So when you raise your standards, their ego interprets it as rejection. It interprets your silence as a challenge. It interprets your boundaries as an insult. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because their ego is suddenly confronted with the truth. They no longer meet the requirements to stay in your life. But raising your standards is not about punishing them. It's about honoring you. It's about choosing a life where you don't have to question your worth every day. It's about giving yourself the love you were waiting to receive. It's about creating emotional stability instead of emotional chaos. And in doing so, you become someone they cannot reach with the same old tactics. What once worked no longer works. What once pulled you in now pushes you away. And that realization hits harder than any confrontation ever could. In the end, the regret they feel isn't just about losing you. It's about losing the version of you who would have stayed. The version of you who believed in their potential, the version of you who tried, the version of you who cared deeply. When that version evolves, disappears, and outgrows the place where they left you, their ego feels the impact long before their heart ever does. This keynote is about something most people underestimate: the comeback. Not the loud, vengeful, dramatic kind, the quiet, consistent, self-built transformation that happens when you decide your healing isn't about them anymore. When you rise in a way that has nothing to do with proving a point, but everything to do with reclaiming your life, it creates a kind of power they can't touch. And that's exactly why it becomes the thing they regret the most. Because nothing bruises someone's ego like watching you thrive in the exact life they never thought you'd build without them. Your comeback doesn't begin with success. It begins with stillness. It begins the moment you stop begging the past to come back and start choosing the future you deserve. It begins with small things: getting out of bed earlier, taking care of your body, surrounding yourself with people who pour into you, saying no to things that drain you, saying yes to things that grow you. These changes seem subtle, almost invisible at first, but they accumulate. And while they are happening, the person who left you behind has no idea that your silence isn't defeat. It's rebuilding. As you pour into yourself, you shift your emotional center of gravity. You're no longer pulled down by the weight of what happened. You stop replaying the moments where you felt unworthy. You stop internalizing the words they used to minimize you. You stop carrying the guilt for things you were never responsible for. Instead, you begin to look at yourself through a clearer lens. You see the strength you ignored, the resilience you forgot, the value you kept giving away. This clarity becomes the foundation of your comeback. Not revenge, not spite, but self-respect. And as you rise, something shifts in your energy. You become lighter. Your conversations become more intentional. Your presence becomes more grounded. People notice. They can feel when someone regains their sense of self. You start attracting opportunities, friendships, and environments that match your growth. You become magnetic in a way you never were before, not because you changed who you are, but because you finally aligned with who you were meant to be. What makes your comeback so powerful is the fact that it wasn't built for an audience. It wasn't built to make someone jealous or regretful. It wasn't built to prove anything. It was built for your future, not your past. But eventually, your past sees it. They come across your glow, your calm, your confidence. They see the life you're living, a life they had access to, a life they could have been part of, a life they didn't value. And in that realization, regret blooms, not because you're trying to trigger it, but because it's the natural emotional consequence of losing something rare. People often think regret comes from missing someone. It actually comes from recognizing what they were too blind or too immature to appreciate when they had the chance. And your comeback exaggerates that truth. It shows what was possible had they chosen better. It reflects back to them the version of you they underestimated. The version you've grown into is the version they were not ready for, and now never get to experience again. Your comeback is a quiet revolution. It is the universe confirming that your story didn't end where they walked away. It is the unfolding of a life you might never have built if they had stayed, and that is why it becomes the deepest, longest lasting regret for them. Not the loss of a relationship, but the loss of the person you became after they were gone. They don't just regret losing you, they regret losing access to the version of you who rose without them, healed without them, and became extraordinary beyond their imagination. In the end, healing fast isn't about proving anything to him. It's about returning home to yourself. Every boundary you set, every moment you choose peace, every step you take toward your own growth becomes a quiet declaration of your worth. And while his ego may struggle with the reality of losing the version of you who once tolerated his chaos, your only responsibility is to rise. Your comeback is your closure, your peace is your power, and the life you build after him is the one thing he'll never be able to forget.